Human beings often believe that life moves in the right direction only when they keep making it happen. When a relationship begins to fade, they hold on more tightly. When success feels uncertain, they work longer. When plans start falling apart, they immediately search for another strategy, convinced that one more effort will restore what is slipping away. At first, this feels like responsibility. It feels wise to stay in control, but beneath that determination, something quieter is unfolding. The harder they try to bend life to their will, the heavier it becomes, as though the future they are chasing keeps retreating with every desperate step. That resistance rarely arrives as a dramatic crisis. It reveals itself gradually. The same effort brings less peace. Goals that once felt meaningful begin leaving behind an unexpected emptiness. Achievement loses its ability to satisfy, yet the instinct is always the same. Push harder, plan more, stay busy. Few stop long enough to ask whether relentless effort is solving the problem or quietly becoming part of it. Constant movement creates the comforting illusion of progress, but it can also become the easiest way to avoid the silence where the deepest questions have been waiting all along. Sometimes the greatest obstacle is not a lack of effort, it is never pausing long enough to discover whether the path itself still deserves your trust. Long before modern psychology gave language to this struggle, Stoic philosophy pointed toward a quieter way of living. It never discouraged discipline, ambition, or meaningful action. It simply drew a clear boundary between what belongs to us and what never has. Peace begins where that boundary is respected. The future cannot be forced into obedience, and no amount of control can guarantee the life we imagine. Strange as it seems, the direction you have been searching for often begins to reveal itself only after you stop trying to command every step. Release what was never yours to govern and trust God with everything beyond your reach. From childhood, we are taught that action solves almost everything. If something feels uncertain, work harder. If life becomes uncomfortable, make another plan. If anxiety begins to rise, fill every empty hour until there is no space left to hear your own thoughts. These lessons sound responsible because they encourage discipline, persistence, and resilience. In many situations, they are valuable. Progress rarely belongs to those who refuse to act, but hidden beneath these ideas is another habit that quietly develops without us noticing. We begin believing that movement itself is the answer regardless of its direction. The moment uncertainty appears, we rush toward the next solution, convinced that standing still is somehow dangerous. Over time, this instinct becomes so automatic that we no longer stop to ask why we are moving at all. We only know that remaining busy feels safer than remaining still. The strange part is that a life filled with constant effort can still leave someone feeling completely lost. Activity creates the appearance of purpose, but appearances are often poor guides. A person can spend years climbing with determination only to realize they have been climbing the wrong mountain all along. This is where a subtle but important difference begins to emerge. Discipline is not the same as desperation, even though they can look identical from the outside. Both wake up early, both continue when things become difficult, both refuse to give up after temporary setbacks, yet one is guided by clarity while the other is driven by fear. A disciplined person acts because they know what belongs within their control. A desperate person acts because they are terrified of what happens if they stop. The actions may appear similar, but the mind behind them could not be more different. One creates stability, the other slowly consumes it. This is why two people can work equally hard and experience completely different forms of peace. One finishes each day knowing they have done what they could. The other lies awake searching for another strategy, another improvement, another way to force tomorrow into becoming exactly what they imagined. Their exhaustion does not come from effort itself, it comes from carrying responsibilities that were never theirs to carry. The Stoic philosophers spent a great deal of time reflecting on this distinction because they understood that confusion between action and control creates unnecessary suffering. Marcus Aurelius expressed this idea with remarkable clarity when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." They encouraged people to give themselves fully to what could actually be shaped by character, judgment, and intention, while releasing their grip on everything else. That idea sounds simple until life begins testing it. When a relationship changes, Despite your honesty, it becomes difficult to accept that another person's heart has never belonged to your control. When an opportunity disappears, despite careful preparation, the mind immediately searches for mistakes that may not even exist. We convince ourselves that if only we had worked harder, spoken differently, or planned more carefully, reality would have obeyed our wishes. This belief feels comforting because it creates the illusion that everything depends on us, yet it also traps us inside endless self-judgment, because every disappointment becomes evidence that we failed to control something that was never fully ours in the first place. Many people quietly spend years living inside this invisible struggle. They call it ambition because that sounds admirable. They call it responsibility because that sounds mature. Few recognize that underneath both labels there may simply be an unwillingness to face uncertainty. Silence becomes uncomfortable because silence removes distractions without constant activity. Questions begin appearing that have waited patiently in the background for years. Is this work still meaningful to me? Am I pursuing this goal because it reflects my values or because I fear disappointing others? Would I still choose this path if no one else ever praised me for walking it? Questions like these cannot be answered while the mind is racing toward the next achievement. They require something far more difficult than relentless effort. They require honesty, and honesty often asks us to admit that much of what we have been chasing was never deeply examined in the first place. This explains why business has become one of the easiest places to hide. A crowded schedule leaves little room for reflection. As long as another task is waiting, another message needs answering, or another objective demands attention, we can postpone the conversations we need to have with ourselves. The irony is difficult to ignore. People often believe they are running toward their purpose when they are actually running away from the possibility that they may have chosen the wrong direction years ago. Slowing down threatens the identity built around constant productivity. If being busy has become proof of your worth, then stillness begins to feel like failure instead of wisdom. Yet life has an interesting way of exposing this illusion. Eventually there comes a period when effort alone no longer produces clarity. Plans stop unfolding as expected. Motivation fades without explanation. The harder you push, the less natural everything begins to feel. At first, the instinct is to double your effort once again, but perhaps the deeper invitation is not to ask how much harder you can work. Perhaps it is finally time to ask whether the direction itself, the same unquestioned loyalty you have been giving it all along. But if forcing life cannot create certainty, why do so many people continue doing it? The answer is quieter than it first appears. Control creates the feeling of safety even when it fails to produce real security. The human mind would often rather carry a false sense of influence than face the discomfort of uncertainty. That is why people cling to routines that no longer help them, relationships that have already changed, and ambitions that quietly stopped reflecting who they are years ago. The familiar may be painful, but it still feels predictable. Trust, on the other hand, asks us to release the comforting illusion that everything can be managed if we simply try hard enough. That request feels frightening because it leaves the ego without its favorite defense. It can no longer pretend that enough planning will eliminate every surprise, or that perfect effort guarantees perfect results. So instead of questioning the need for control, the mind simply demands more of it, believing the next attempt will finally succeed where all the others have failed. If these reflections are helping you see your own life a little more clearly, consider subscribing. We explore these timeless ideas not to escape reality, but to understand it more deeply. If this way of thinking resonates with you, continue this journey with us, because the next insight may be the one that changes the way you see yourself forever. Picture someone rowing a small boat across a wide river. At first, the journey feels manageable. The current pushes back, but determination seems enough to overcome it. As time passes, each stroke requires greater effort, while the shoreline appears almost unchanged. Exhaustion begins replacing confidence, yet the response is rarely to pause. The instinct is to row harder, because stopping feels like surrender. Few people consider another possibility. Perhaps the current is not preventing progress simply to frustrate them. Perhaps it is revealing that they are moving against something larger than themselves. Nature rarely argues with us through words, it speaks through resistance, timing, and consequence. A river does not become cruel because it refuses to carry a boat upstream, it simply follows its own direction. Much of life operates with the same quiet honesty. Reality continues being what it is, regardless of how intensely we insist that it should become something else. This perspective does not encourage passivity or abandoning responsibility. The Stoic approach has never been about waiting for life to solve your problems while you remain motionless. It asks for something far more demanding. It asks for awareness before action. Instead of reacting immediately to every obstacle, it encourages examining whether the obstacle is asking for persistence or redirection. Those two responses require completely different forms of strength. Persistence is admirable when the destination remains worthy. Redirection becomes wisdom when the destination itself has lost its meaning. Unfortunately, pride often makes the second choice far more difficult. After investing years into a career, a relationship, or a personal identity, admitting that something no longer fits can feel like admitting failure. So people continue pouring energy into situations that stopped nourishing them long ago, hoping that enough effort will somehow restore what has already changed. In reality, effort cannot revive every past. Sometimes it only delays the moment we accept that life has already moved forward, while we remained attached to an older version of it. This is why certain seasons feel unusually heavy. The work that once energized you begins feeling mechanical. Conversations lose their warmth. Goals that once inspired you become obligations carried out from habit instead of conviction. At first, these changes appear small, almost easy to dismiss. A little more fatigue, a little less enthusiasm, a growing sense that each accomplishment brings shorter moments of satisfaction before another feeling of emptiness quietly returns. Many interpret these experiences as signs that they simply need more discipline. They search for better routines, stricter schedules, and greater productivity, believing motivation disappeared because they became lazy. That explanation feels reassuring because it preserves the belief that everything remains under their control. Yet there are moments when declining energy is not exposing a lack of discipline at all. It is revealing a growing distance between the life being lived and the life that genuinely reflects who they are becoming. The difficult truth is that movement and progress are not always the same thing. A person can spend years moving without truly arriving anywhere meaningful. Constant activity often disguises this reality because visible effort earns admiration from others and reassurance from ourselves. Few people question someone who appears busy. Fewer still question their own direction, while measurable progress continues appearing on the surface. But life has a remarkable way of exposing the difference between motion and purpose. Eventually, the pace that once felt exciting becomes exhausting, and the destination that once seemed essential no longer offers the peace it promised. Those moments deserve careful attention instead of immediate resistance. They invite a different kind of courage. The willingness to stop measuring life only by how hard you are pushing forward and to begin noticing where your spirit naturally feels alive. Sometimes the path demanding the greatest struggle is not building your character. Sometimes it is quietly asking you to recognize that your greatest act of wisdom is no longer to force the current, but to learn which direction it has been inviting you to follow all along. This is where many people unknowingly make the mistake that slowly reshapes the course of their lives. Instead of listening to the quiet discomfort growing within them, they immediately begin treating it as another obstacle that needs to be conquered. If they feel emotionally exhausted, they become even busier. If loneliness begins settling into the background of their lives, they surround themselves with constant entertainment, endless conversations, or new commitments that leave no room for silence. If doubt quietly appears, they respond by setting larger goals, taking on greater responsibilities, or convincing themselves that success will finally erase the uneasiness they cannot explain. For a while, this approach appears to work. The schedule remains full, progress continues, other people admire their determination. Yet beneath all that movement, something essential remains untouched. The discomfort never truly disappears because it was never asking to be defeated. It was asking to be understood. There is a profound difference between removing a symptom and discovering its cause, but the mind often prefers quick solutions because genuine understanding demands patience. It requires sitting with feelings that cannot be solved in a single afternoon. That kind of stillness feels unfamiliar in a world that constantly rewards immediate action. The human mind has an extraordinary ability to avoid conversations it does not want to have with itself. It does so quietly, often without any conscious intention. A person can convince themselves they are simply being productive while secretly using productivity to escape reflection. Another may pursue one achievement after another, believing each accomplishment will finally bring lasting satisfaction, only to discover that the feeling fades almost as quickly as it arrives. Then another goal appears, followed by another pursuit, creating an endless cycle that feels like progress while leaving the heart strangely unchanged. This pattern becomes difficult to recognize because society rarely questions relentless ambition. People celebrate visible effort. They admire those who never stop moving. Very few pause to ask whether all that movement is leading toward a meaningful destination or simply preventing someone from noticing the growing distance between who they are and the life they are living. The danger does not lie in working hard. Honest effort remains one of the most valuable qualities a person can possess. The danger appears when effort becomes a substitute for awareness, when staying occupied becomes easier than confronting the quiet truths waiting beneath the surface. Life has a way of communicating long before it raises its voice. At first, the messages are almost impossible to notice. A conversation that once felt exciting now leaves you strangely empty. A routine that once brought energy slowly becomes mechanical. Small moments of irritation appear without any obvious cause. Nothing seems dramatically wrong, yet nothing feels entirely right either. Many people dismiss these experiences because they seem too insignificant to deserve attention. They assume everyone feels this way from time to time, and perhaps that assumption is partly true. Temporary dissatisfaction belongs to every human life, but there is a difference between passing discomfort and a persistent feeling that quietly follows you wherever you go. That feeling often returns during moments of silence, when there are no tasks demanding attention and no distractions waiting to fill the room. It is easy to ignore during a busy day. It becomes much harder to ignore when everything finally becomes quiet. Instead of listening carefully, many immediately search for explanations that allow them to continue exactly as before. They tell themselves they simply need a vacation, they need more discipline, they need a different routine, a better strategy, another promotion, another purchase, another milestone. Sometimes those changes genuinely help. Often they do not. The discomfort remains because it was never created by a lack of external success. It came from an internal misalignment that no amount of achievement could permanently disguise. This is one reason people occasionally experience a surprising sense of emptiness. Immediately after reaching a long-awaited goal, they expected a rival to transform them completely, yet after the excitement fades, they find themselves carrying the same unanswered questions into a new chapter of life. The destination changed, but the inner conversation remained unfinished. That realization can feel deeply unsettling because it reveals that the problem was never standing at the finish line. It was quietly walking beside them throughout the entire journey. Ancient Stoic thinkers approached these moments with remarkable clarity. They did not teach people to reject emotion or pretend that discomfort had no place in a meaningful life. Instead, they encouraged careful observation before reaction. An uneasy feeling was not automatically an enemy. Restlessness was not always a weakness. Even disappointment could become valuable if it revealed where expectations had quietly replaced wisdom. Emotional pain often grows destructive only after we stop listening to what it is trying to communicate. When ignored repeatedly, small signals begin gathering strength. Mild frustration becomes chronic exhaustion. Passing uncertainty develops into lasting confusion. A quiet sense of disconnection slowly spreads into every part of daily life until even familiar routines begin feeling strangely foreign. By that stage, many believe life has suddenly turned against them, when in reality the deeper message has been present all along, patiently waiting to be acknowledged. This gradual process explains why significant change rarely begins with dramatic events. More often it begins with moments so subtle that they seem almost unimportant at first. A growing reluctance to start each morning. A persistent feeling that success no longer satisfies in the way it once did. a quiet awareness that the person staring back from the mirror is fulfilling expectations without truly feeling present within their own life. These moments deserve attention because they reveal something that endless activity cannot. They remind us that peace cannot be manufactured through constant effort alone. It grows when we develop the courage to stop treating every uncomfortable feeling as a problem, to eliminate and begin seeing it as an invitation to understand ourselves more honestly. Only then does the path ahead become clearer, not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because we finally stop drowning out the quiet wisdom that has been trying to guide us from within. Eventually, quiet discomfort stops asking politely for attention and begins changing the shape of your life. The uneasiness that once appeared only during silent moments slowly follows you into ordinary days. Waking up feels heavier than it used to. Conversations become shorter because your mind is somewhere else. Work that once inspired genuine enthusiasm begins feeling strangely mechanical, as though you are repeating movements that no longer belong to you. At first, nothing dramatic happens. Life continues on the surface, much as it always has. Bills are paid, responsibilities are fulfilled, plans remain in motion. From the outside, everything appears stable. Inside, however, a deeper tension continues growing. It is the quiet realization that you can continue living exactly as you are while gradually becoming disconnected from yourself. As Carl Jung observed, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That possibility is difficult to face because it challenges the comforting belief that consistency alone always leads to fulfillment. Sometimes consistency merely allows us to remain comfortable inside patterns that quietly stopped serving us long ago. As this inner conflict deepens, disruption often arrives in ways that seem completely unexpected. A career changes despite years of careful planning. A relationship that appeared strong begins falling apart even after countless attempts to preserve it. An opportunity you believed would define your future suddenly disappears, leaving behind questions that no amount of preparation can answer. These moments rarely ask for permission before they appear. They interrupt routines, challenge identities, and force attention toward realities that have been ignored for far too long. Naturally, the first reaction is resistance. The mind immediately begins searching for someone or something to blame. Perhaps another decision would have prevented this. Perhaps one more conversation, one more sacrifice, one more attempt could have saved what was lost. These thoughts feel understandable because loss immediately captures our attention. We focus on what has disappeared without recognizing what the disappearance may be revealing. When something central to our identity begins collapsing, the ego interprets the event as proof that life has become unfair, instead of considering that the collapse itself may carry meaning beyond immediate pain. This perspective is difficult to accept because the ego measures life almost entirely through possession and permanence. It believes success means keeping what has already been built, protecting familiar identities, and preventing unwanted change at all costs. Whenever something breaks apart, it immediately labels the experience as failure because it judges events by visible outcomes alone. But life follows rhythms that are far less interested in preserving comfort than in encouraging growth. Nature offers countless reminders of this truth without ever speaking a single word. Leaves fall so new ones can eventually emerge. Forest fires destroy old growth while preparing the ground for future life. Rivers gradually reshape stone through patient persistence rather than sudden force. Nothing in nature remains exactly as it was forever because change is woven into its very existence. Human life follows the same principle, even though we often resist it with remarkable determination. We hope certain chapters will last indefinitely, simply because they once made us feel secure. Yet, security built upon permanence is always fragile because permanence itself has never been promised. The Stoic way of seeing these moments invites a quieter response. It does not ask us to celebrate loss or pretend that grief should disappear through reason alone. Pain deserves honesty. Disappointment deserves acknowledgement. The end of something meaningful naturally leaves an emptiness that cannot simply be ignored. But after that first wave of emotion begins settling, another question slowly becomes possible. Instead of asking only what has been taken away, we can begin wondering what this experience is asking us to release. Those are very different questions. One keeps attention fixed on the past, the other gently turns attention toward the future. This shift does not erase sadness, but it changes the direction in which sadness moves rather than becoming a prison. It gradually becomes a teacher. There are lessons that comfort never reveals, because comfort rarely demands deeper examination difficulty. Interrupts certainty, and within that interruption lies an opportunity to understand ourselves with greater honesty than stability ever required. Looking back over their lives, many people discover that the chapters they once fought hardest to prevent became the ones they eventually understood most. Clearly, the job they desperately wanted to keep had quietly begun draining their spirit years before it ended. The relationship they struggled to preserve had already stopped allowing either person to grow. The carefully planned future they mourned was built around an identity they eventually outgrew without realizing it. None of these realizations arrive immediately. Time softens resistance and creates enough distance to notice connections that were invisible while emotions remained overwhelming. This is why genuine transformation rarely begins with certainty. More often it begins after certainty has been removed. When familiar structures disappear, we are gradually forced to ask questions we postponed for years. Who am I without this title, this relationship, or this plan? What remains when the identity I carefully protected can no longer support me? Those questions feel unsettling precisely because they move beyond achievement and reach something more enduring. They invite us to discover a version of ourselves that does not depend entirely upon circumstances remaining unchanged. That discovery unfolds slowly. It cannot be rushed, negotiated, or forced into existence through greater effort. It emerges through acceptance, reflection, and the quiet willingness to trust that losing one chapter does not mean losing your direction. Sometimes the end of stability is simply the beginning of a life that finally reflects who you truly are instead of who you spent years believing you needed to become. Only after we loosen our grip on what has already fallen apart do we begin noticing something that was impossible to see before. While we were consumed with holding everything together, our attention became painfully narrow. Every thought revolved around repairing the past, recovering what had been lost, or forcing life back into a version that no longer existed. In that state, the mind overlooks almost everything except its own disappointment. It scans the world for confirmation that something valuable has disappeared, and because that is all it searches for, that is all it continues to find. This is one of the quiet consequences of attachment. It does not simply make letting go difficult, it also blinds us to everything waiting beyond what we refuse to release. The strange part is that life rarely leaves a person standing in complete emptiness. Long before one chapter fully closes, another has already begun unfolding in small and almost invisible ways. The difficulty is not that guidance fails to appear. The difficulty is that grief often occupies so much of our attention that we cannot recognize it when it quietly arrives. This is why the future almost never reveals itself through dramatic certainty. People often expect clarity to arrive all at once, believing that one unmistakable moment will suddenly explain exactly where they should go next. Reality usually unfolds very differently. Direction often begins with something so ordinary that it appears insignificant at first, a conversation that lingers in your thoughts longer than expected, a book opened almost by accident that speaks directly to a question you have been carrying, an invitation you nearly declined, a simple decision to walk a different street, visit a different place, or accept an opportunity that once seemed too small to matter. Looking back, months or even years later, these moments often appear connected in ways that were completely invisible while they were happening. At the time, they seemed random. Only with distance do they reveal themselves as quiet turning points. Life has a remarkable way of introducing change through small beginnings rather than dramatic announcements we simply fail to notice because we spend too much time waiting for certainty instead of paying attention to what is already unfolding in front of us. The mind, trapped in resistance, struggles to recognize these moments because resistance narrows perception. When all your energy is invested in asking why something ended, very little remains available to notice what is beginning. Thoughts repeatedly return to the same memories, the same regrets, and the same imagined alternatives. You replay conversations, reconsider decisions, and search endlessly for explanations that promise emotional relief. Yet while your attention remains fixed behind you, life continues. Moving quietly ahead, opportunities do not always announce themselves loudly enough to compete with constant rumination. They often appear gently, requiring a level of presence that anxiety rarely allows. This is one reason inner stillness becomes so valuable. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. It does not magically create new possibilities. Instead, it removes the noise that prevents you from recognizing possibilities that have existed all along. The world itself may not change overnight, but the way you perceive it changes profoundly once your attention is no longer imprisoned by what cannot be altered. The Stoic perspective encourages exactly this kind of attention rather than becoming consumed by everything reality refuses to provide. It asks us to engage fully with whatever reality has already placed within reach. This approach is neither passive nor indifferent. It requires tremendous discipline because the mind naturally prefers chasing distant possibilities over appreciating present responsibilities. It is much easier to dream about another life than to observe the quiet lessons hidden within the one unfolding today. Yet genuine wisdom grows through careful attention to ordinary experience. The next meaningful step is rarely hidden behind impossible circumstances. More often it exists inside today's conversation, today's responsibility, today's unexpected encounter, or today's quiet realization. The future is built from these seemingly ordinary moments, even though they rarely appear extraordinary while we are living through them. By remaining present instead of endlessly searching elsewhere, we begin noticing how many opportunities quietly pass through our lives without demanding recognition. There is another reason these ordinary moments carry such quiet influence. They do not force us into a new direction. They simply offer the possibility of one. Guidance rarely removes freedom. Instead, it presents invitations that require our willingness to respond. A single conversation may encourage a new perspective, but it cannot make you embrace it. An unexpected opportunity may appear, but it cannot decide whether you will accept it. A difficult experience may reveal an important truth, but it cannot force you to learn from it. Life continually offers these gentle invitations while respecting the choices each person makes. This is why two individuals can experience remarkably similar circumstances, yet walk away with entirely different futures. One notices the lesson hidden inside the experience, the other notices only the inconvenience. The difference often has very little to do with intelligence or luck. It has everything to do with attention. A restless mind sees interruption. A patient mind sees direction. Gradually, something begins changing within anyone who learns to observe life this way. The desperate need for certainty loses its grip because certainty is no longer treated as the foundation of peace. Confidence grows from a different source altogether. Instead of demanding complete knowledge about the future, you begin trusting your ability to respond wisely to whatever arrives. That shift transforms the way opportunities are recognized. You stop waiting for unmistakable signs that eliminate all risk and instead become sensitive to the quiet movements of life that gently invite you forward one step at a time. Looking back, you often realize that the past was never completely hidden. It simply unfolded slowly enough to require patience, humility, and the willingness to release what had already ended before you could fully appreciate what had quietly been waiting to begin. As this way of living slowly takes root, the change is rarely dramatic enough for anyone else to notice. There is no single morning when you suddenly wake up free from anxiety, completely certain about every decision, or untouched by disappointment. The transformation begins much more quietly than that. It appears in ordinary moments that once would have unsettled you. A delayed answer no longer sends your thoughts racing toward the worst possible conclusion. An unexpected setback no longer feels like proof that everything is falling apart. A closed door still disappoints you, but it no longer convinces you that your future has been stolen. These changes seem almost too small to matter, yet they slowly reshape the way you experience life itself. The world around you may remain unpredictable, but your relationship with uncertainty begins to soften. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause. Instead of trying to force an answer, you allow enough space for understanding to arrive before your emotions rush ahead of your judgment. That quiet pause gradually becomes one of the strongest forms of discipline you will ever develop, because it prevents fear from making decisions that wisdom should make. Instead, as this inner steadiness grows, another habit begins losing its influence over your Life, the constant need to predict every outcome, slowly releases its grip. Before your mind believed that peace depended on knowing exactly how everything would unfold, you wanted certainty before taking a step, reassurance before making a decision, and guarantees before investing your heart into anything meaningful. When those guarantees never arrived, anxiety filled the empty space. It convinced you that more planning would finally produce the certainty you were searching for, yet certainty remained just beyond your reach because life has never promised complete visibility of the road ahead. Gradually, you discover something unexpected. Confidence does not come from eliminating uncertainty. It comes from learning that uncertainty itself does not have the power to destroy your peace unless you surrender that power willingly. Once this realization settles into your thinking, many situations that once felt overwhelming begin losing their emotional intensity. The future remains unknown, but it no longer feels like an enemy waiting to punish you for every imperfect decision. This does not mean your ambitions disappear or that your desire to improve somehow fades away. Quite the opposite often happens. Your efforts become clearer because they are no longer tangled with constant fear. You still prepare carefully, you still work with commitment, you still honor your responsibilities because meaningful action remains essential. The difference lies beneath the action itself. You no longer work because you believe endless effort can control every result. You work because excellence is part of your character, regardless of how circumstances respond. That distinction changes everything. The quality of your effort improves because it is no longer weakened by desperation. You stop wasting mental energy trying to manipulate outcomes that belong beyond your reach and begin investing that same energy into the quality of your own choices. Instead of asking whether success is guaranteed, you begin asking whether your actions reflect the person you are trying to become. That question creates a kind of freedom that achievement alone could never provide because your peace is no longer borrowed from external events. It grows from the integrity of your own conduct. Many people misunderstand this kind of trust because they mistake it for passivity. They imagine that releasing control means lowering standards, accepting mediocrity, or abandoning responsibility altogether. Nothing could be further from the truth. Genuine trust demands extraordinary discipline because it asks you to continue acting wisely even when immediate rewards fail to appear. It requires patience during seasons when progress feels invisible. It asks you to remain honest when dishonesty might offer quicker advantages. It encourages consistency even when recognition never arrives. None of these choices are easy because the ego constantly searches for evidence that its efforts are being rewarded. But character develops most deeply when action is no longer dependent upon constant external confirmation. You continue planting seeds because planting is your responsibility. Whether those seeds bloom tomorrow or much later belongs to a larger order than your personal timetable. This perspective does not weaken effort, it purifies it by separating faithful action from anxious attachment. Something remarkable often follows this change, although it rarely happens in the way people expect. Life begins feeling lighter, not because problems suddenly disappear, but because you stop carrying